Thanks so much, everyone, for watching. We've got an epic lineup tonight of speakers. We've got an awesome panel here. Amazing group of functional doctors, technology, activists for a leap forward in medicine.
You know, our goal is to make it easy for practitioners to learn in community.
There's a lot of community happening tonight. I want to say welcome to all of the communities that are watching at home. This ecosystem that has been set up by the meetup groups, we believe will be the future ecosystem of this evolved primary care network that we are looking to develop, and it all revolves around you.
Welcome to the Functional Forum. Thanks for joining us in the charge to accelerate the evolution of medicine. Please welcome your guest host, Dr. Tom OBryan.
Welcome to the Functional Forum. I'm Dr. Tom OBryan. I'm your guest host. James isn't here. He's off having a glass of wine somewhere because he doesn't have to work. As I said, I'd do this, so great. We're in New Delhi, India, and this is the International Symposium on Wheat-Related Disorders, beyond celiac, beyond the gut. Professor Yehuda Schoenfeld from Israel, Deanna Minich, Natasha Campbell McBride from England, Rodney Ford from New Zealand, how wheat-related disorders are much more common in producing autoimmune mechanisms beyond celiac disease. Beyond celiac disease. So let's see what our first speaker has to say. Almost every degenerative disease that I know of is a disease of inflammation. At the cellular level, the cell's on fire. It doesn't matter what degenerative disease you're speaking of, there's one or two, but in general, atherosclerosis, cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, arthritis, multiple sclerosis, they're diseases of inflammation at the cellular level. Why is the immune system activated? What is the mechanisms? Our next speaker has devoted his life to that question. He is considered the godfather of autoimmunity. And there are so many accolades that we could say to this man. The thing that I often say when I'm talking to my friends about Professor Schoenfeld is that at last count that I know of, which was a couple of years ago, 28 of the PhD students who received their PhDs in immunology from Professor Schoenfeld, there are more, but 28 of them chair departments of immunology in med schools and hospitals around the world. This is the godfather, Professor Schoenfeld.
So the factors which are related and cause autoimmune disease can be divided into 4 groups, just for simplifying the issue. There are genetic factors, there are immune deficiency factors like IgA deficiency. There are hormonal factors, not only estrogen and progesterone, but for instance prolactin, which is extremely important in inducing autoimmune disease. For instance, women who would breastfeed their children, and they will have what we call the postpartum exacerbation, and the reason is increase in prolactin level. And the most important are environmental factors, which are very diverse, from infectious agents. EB virus is responsible for at least 33 different autoimmune diseases that we know, but most probably more than that. But basically, you develop autoimmune disease but having a genetic background. There is no autoimmune disease which is not genetic. We know the genes. We know in many of them the HLA, like in celiac disease, but all of them are genetic. So it's very easy for me when a new patient enters my clinic to ask, anybody in your family suffer from thyroid autoimmune disease? The answer is always my father, my grandmother, my mother, myself, my daughter, etc. I'm using thyroid disease because it's the most prevalent autoimmune disease, more than 2% of the population. So we have the genetic and we have the environmental factor. The common denominator to all the environmental factors are adjuvant effect. They stimulate the immune system. Being bacteria or viruses, it's constitutively inherited by the bacteria and viruses to enable our immune system to recognize and to react against it. So it's a kind of God or Krishna present to the human being. Actually, for the first time when Norlos tried to induce autoimmune disease with stimulating with thyroglobulin, he was able to induce only anti-thyroglobulin antibodies. Only when he emulsified it with adjuvant, by the way, from bacteria, he was able to induce Hashimoto thyroiditis. So it's genetic and environmental factor. What is genetic? Why some people would be more prone to develop autoimmune disease? So let's take one of the notorious HLA that we published a paper about them. HLA-DRB1 haplotype. As you can, in each one of the diseases, these haplotypes prevail more than in the other, as well as when you have people with 2 or 3 diseases, it's even more prevalent. Why these people are more prone to develop autoimmune disease? Because they have a better immune system, aggressive immune system, commando unit immune system. So they had advantage in evolution by fighting Klebsiella, cholera, and other common infection, but at the same time they are at risk of developing autoimmune disease. You can see, thank you very much. I have to say that when I was young and beautiful, I served in the Israeli army for 5 years. I had to do everything in 5 minutes. That's happened to me today when I returned to India. I landed at 8 o'clock. At 5 minutes I had to take shower. At 5 minutes I had to take to take breakfast and then to wait 6 hours for my lecture. So be it as it may, as you can see, this is a paper in an unknown journal called Nature, showing that those people with HLA-DRB1 have a better immune system, as you can see. So let's explain it by 2 cars. One is Lamborghini, which is a very fast car. When drives in 300 kilometers per hour and you throw a stone on this Lamborghini, this car will upside down and will develop autoimmune disease. While Fiat 500, a small car, if you will throw a stone, it will return back to its way. So it's the aggressive immune system. This explains why there is another group of people in the world who are more prone to develop autoimmune disease, and there are some of those people here in the audience, I've noticed it, and these are females at the childbearing ages, because they have also a very aggressive immune system. Actually, women are always more aggressive they are always having a more aggressive immune system. For instance, a woman, if she has a common cold, she will take a pill, she will take a tea, she will prepare breakfast, she will go to work. A man with a common cold, he will lie immediately in bed, bring me the tea to bed, etc., etc. And that's the reason why women have higher antibodies against bacteria, as you can see here, and they react more aggressively to different conditions in our body. And this is also the reason why most of autoimmune diseases prevail in those female at the childbearing ages, especially between 16 years old age to almost 40 or 58. And moreover, this is the reason why females actually outlast men. As I tell my wife that when I will die, and eventually I will, she will be able to marry at least 2 Russian oligarchs. So that's the way. So one of the reasons that they have a more aggressive immune system are the estrogen. There are receptors of estrogen on lymphocytes, and they stimulate the lymphocyte. They secrete BLyS, lymphocyte stimulating factor. But it happened to be also a change in the microbiome in females. And actually, there were studies in which the microbiome of female was transferred to male and vice versa, for instance, with type 1 diabetes, to show how the female microbiome can actually improve or deteriorate the condition of autoimmune disease.
Hi, I'm Dr. Tom Bain, president of Microbiome Labs. I'm also a healthcare practitioner, chiropractor, and have been treating gluten-sensitive patients for over 25 years. I'm here in Delhi at the Wheat-Related Disorders Conference, and taking a lot of great information home with us. What's been fascinating is some of the new information on diagnostics. So very excited to see some of the laboratory changes in the U.S. that will come out of this conference. But really taking a lot out of the repair of the wheat-related disorder patient. So once these patients have had all their inflammation and they've been sick for a long time, the different strategies to help those patients heal. It's been very exciting to learn that information. Looking forward to taking that home and using it with my patients.
Nothing is as powerful as a practicing physician who completely changes her career to save her children. Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride was a practicing neurologist when her child developed autism, and the best pediatricians could not help. She did a deep dive into the literature late at night after work, late at night, every night, trying to figure out what was going on, and she developed what we now know as the GAPS protocol. Dr. McBride has trained thousands of practitioners all over the world on the GAPS protocol. Hundreds of thousands of children have gone through these protocols and been helped. Dr. McBride. I have the privilege of introducing our next speaker. She's a personal friend. Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride was a practicing neurologist whose child developed autism. And she went to the pediatricians, the best pediatricians in her area. No one could help. She said, I need to figure out what's going on with my child. And she did a deep dive into autism. That was the founding of the GAPS protocol. Worldwide, very famous now, thousands of doctors, tens of thousands of doctors have studied her protocol and apply her principles. It is my privilege to introduce to you Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride.
Where does gut flora come from? We now know. For a long time we thought that the baby was sterile until the baby was born. Now we know that there is nothing sterile in the human body. A woman's uterus has uterine flora. Placenta has its own flora. Ovaries have their own flora. Abdominal cavity has its own flora. Blood vessels have their own flora. Even the brain has its own flora. So the baby starts acquiring gut flora from the mother during pregnancy. When the baby goes through the birth canal, at the moment of birth, the baby already has some microbes living inside its digestive system, but then the majority of microbes come during the moment of birth. Baby goes through the birth canal, it swallows microbes that live inside the mother's vagina. Where do those microbes come from? Two sources. One from the mother's bowel. So if she has abnormal gut flora, she will have abnormal flora in her birth canal, and that's what she will give to her baby from day one. Second source is the father. The father, if he's got abnormal gut flora, that flora will populate his groin and all the organs in that area, and he shares that flora with the mother on a regular basis. That's how parents pass their gut flora to their child at the moment of birth. It's a beautiful process. It's a beautiful mechanism. We pass our gut flora to our children. Children who are born through C-section have lower diversity of microbes, have different gut flora that predisposes them to allergies, asthma, eczema, and learning disabilities. They have a higher incidence of these things because they've missed that step. And their gut flora comes from the hands of people who look after them, from the nipples of the mother, because the mother's milk is a probiotic food. It's full of microbes. She has microbial flora living in her milk glands, in her milk ducts. So every time she breastfeeds the baby, she gives the baby microbes. So if she's healthy, she'll give the baby healthy microbial flora. If she's not, then it will not be healthy. Breast milk is a major influence on the composition of the gut flora of the baby. Bottle-fed babies develop completely different gut flora with low diversity. It's a sick gut flora. That is why that population of children develop allergies, asthma, eczema, learning disabilities, and other problems. And now we've got research to show that even if a baby is mostly breastfed and the bottle is only used occasionally, even that occasional bottle damages the gut flora in the baby. So bottle feeding is not an option for humanity. Only breast milk should be given to a human baby. That is why in our modern world we need to resurrect the old practice, thousands of years, millions of years old practice of wet nursing. Humans used to live in small communities, and if one lady who gave a birth for whatever reason cannot breastfeed, there'll be lots of other girls around who are breastfeeding their babies. They will feed her baby. That is 1,000 times better than any powder milk you will buy in a supermarket or a pharmacy. We need to resurrect that practice. It is absolutely essential if we want to continue producing healthy children. Weaning, introduction of solids, brings the composition of baby's flora closer to the adult state. What can damage our gut flora? Can any of you raise your hand and say you've never been exposed to any of these? We live in a world which is launching an onslaught on our gut flora. Absolute Armageddon. So we have a modern epidemic of abnormal gut flora in humanity. Gut flora is getting worse generation after generation. Before I talk about the health of a child in my clinic, I work with children a lot. I always talk about the health of the parents first and the health of grandparents too. And a typical scenario has emerged. If grandparents, after the Second World War, when the antibiotics were discovered, and then they really came out on the market in the end of 50s and in the 60s. If grandparents had maybe 1 or 2 courses of antibiotics prior to having their children, these antibiotics damaged their gut flora slightly. So they passed their slightly damaged gut flora to their children. Then their children grew up in a very different world compared to their parents. They grew up in a world where industrial agriculture came into power, so all the foods are laced with antibiotics, and doctors gave them antibiotics for every cough and sneeze. Antibiotics are overprescribed and have been overprescribed for any kind of little suspicion of any kind of infection. And every course of antibiotics leaves less and less of balance and diversity in your gut and more of imbalance and pathogenic picture in your digestive tract. Then this population, this generation of young people, many of them were not breastfed because that's where powder milk came on the market. So they didn't receive that support. And then the ladies in that generation at the age of 15, 16, sometimes a bit later, were put on a contraceptive pill, which they had to take for quite a few years before they were ready to have their first child. Contraceptive pill has a devastating effect on the gut flora composition. So by the time this generation of young people decides to have their first child, their gut flora is seriously damaged. And that is what they're giving to their child. And what I see in my clinic and what other natural doctors see in their clinics, that babies that we see now are sicker than babies that we saw last year. And those babies are sicker than babies that we saw 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. The whole thing is accelerating very, very fast. Young ladies who will have babies for the first time this year will produce sicker children and a higher proportion of sick children than ladies who had first babies last year. Humanity is running into a wall, into an absolute disaster. Because with every generation, the damage to the gut flora gets deeper and deeper. On top of that, there's a natural thing that happens with every pregnancy. It sounds cruel, sounds unfair, but the way Mother Nature designed the woman's body, that it uses pregnancy as a chance to clean up by dumping toxins into the baby. We have generations of young ladies now who have been dyeing their hair from the age of 5, who have been doing nails and makeup and personal care products, man-made chemicals and drugs and contraceptive pill and food. Our chemical industry has discovered and invented some 80,000 of new chemicals that don't exist in nature. Your body is part of nature, it doesn't know what to do with them. So many of these chemicals absorb very effectively through skin, through mucous membranes, through lungs, through mouth, through digestive tract, and they are stored in the woman's body. And our women nowadays have higher and higher toxic load by the time they're ready to have their first child. And also women are having their babies now later and later in life. Now majority of ladies have their first child at the age of 30, sometimes later. So her toxic load is much higher than it would have been when she was 20. And when she gets pregnant, her body thinks, great, I'll clean up. and it dumps the lot into the baby. If that amount is enough to kill the baby, the woman will have a miscarriage or a stillbirth. We have an epidemic of miscarriages in the Western world. Many ladies nowadays have 1, 2, 3 miscarriages before they're able to produce a viable baby. Of course, she cleans up on every miscarriage. It's not a happy event to have a miscarriage, but there's a positive side to it. So eventually her body is clean enough to produce a healthy baby, or a baby a bit healthier. So abnormal gut flora, these children get now, majority of children in the world now acquire abnormal gut flora from day one from their mother, and a heavy toxic load. So of course their constitution is not going to be strong. It is going to be much, much weaker than the constitution of the generation of her parents, or the generation of her grandparents, which was even stronger, because they were born, those grandparents, on a planet where the whole planet was organic. Just think about that. There were no antibiotics, no vaccinations, no food industry, no pharmaceutical industry. These people have very different constitution. That is why they're now living into their 80s and 90s. But that process has already slowed down in the English-speaking countries. Already alarm bells are being rung that the aging of the population is slowing down to a halt. When that generation of people dies, newer generations coming in do not have such constitution to live so long. The aging will reduce and reduce and reduce. And now the children who were born in the English-speaking world in the last 10, 15 years, quite a large percent of them are already being buried by their parents. They do not survive. They have such poor constitution, their parents have to bury them. And that proportion of children is growing every year. In the English-speaking countries, other countries are following not that far behind. So these children have compromised gut, compromised immune system, compromised detox system. Their bodies are a dumping ground for huge amount of toxicity. They have abnormal gut flora, abnormal immune function. Of course, they're immune compromised. 85% of your immune system is in the gut. If your gut flora is abnormal, your immune system is compromised. It's going to react. I do not believe that our immune system is misguided, that it doesn't know what it's doing. I think it does know what it's doing at every moment. It's just the conditions that it's working in are so drastically different than what they should be.
Thank you so much.
The next sessions by Dr. Tom O'Brien have been much awaited by all of us. Dr. Tom will lay out in detail what is the autoimmune tautology.
So this is a take-home slide. The autoimmune process can be arrested if the interplay between genes and the environment is prevented by reestablishing your gut barrier, healing the gut. So one of the takeaway questions is going to be, how am I irritating my gut? And you'll find that wheat is a common trigger for everyone. It irritates their gut. How is it that I'm irritating my gut, and how do I stop irritating my gut? You want to you want to bring down the symptoms of thyroid disease. You want to reduce the symptoms of rheumatoid arthritis. You want to reduce the symptoms of MS. You have to heal your gut. And we've got world experts here on the Dream Team this weekend to talk about that. Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride, Dr. Aaron Lerner, Dr. Torsten Matthias. These people are going to talk to you about the gut and how critically important it is, and how it's a number one factor when you're dealing with any disease, any degenerative disease. So what triggers intestinal permeability? That is the million-dollar question. The takeaway for this weekend is, what triggers all of this? Increased permeability could be due to environmental factors such as infections, you'll learn about that, toxic molecules from food, you'll learn about that possibly initiate the autoimmune disease. Impaired intestinal permeability is present in every person who has an adverse reaction to food. Every person, whether it's an IgE reaction or not, every person has impaired intestinal permeability. So you eat a meal and you're sleepy afterwards, you're impaired. You eat a meal, you get headaches afterwards, you're impaired. Anytime you take in a food and you say, boy, that food didn't sit very well, or oh, my joints are hurting after eating that, permeability is involved in that mechanism. We've observed that gliadin, that's a component of wheat. The immunogenic component of gluten induces an increase in intestinal permeability that's small and transient in non-celiac intestinal tissue, but large and persistent over time in celiac tissue. So every time you eat wheat, you get this triggering mechanism that damages your intestines. But it's transient, meaning that it heals, it goes away. But in celiac disease, it doesn't go away, it continues. And what happens is you eventually cross the line and it doesn't go away anymore. That's when the problems start to manifest. Previous studies have shown that gliadin in wheat can cause immediate and transient increase in gut permeability. This process takes place in all individuals who ingest wheat. And this is from the Journal of the American Medical Association. This just came out a year and a half ago. So in this room, is there anyone who would not be included, or who's watching this online, is there anyone who would not be included in the statement in all individuals who ingest wheat? Is there anyone here thinks you don't relate to what the Journal of the American Medical Association is saying? This happens to everyone. Every time you eat wheat, you get intestinal permeability. But it's transient. Your gut heals. Mrs. Patient, the fastest growing cells in the body are the inside lining of the intestines. Every 3 to 5 days, you have a whole new lining to your intestines. So you eat wheat, you tear the lining, that's permeability, but it heals. You have a sandwich for lunch, you tear the lining, but it heals. You have pasta for dinner, you tear the lining, but it heals. Day after week, after month, after year, until one day you don't heal anymore. Now you've got pathogenic intestinal permeability, then you start getting the systemic inflammation, and then your symptoms will come sometime after that. Does that make sense? Nod your head yes, or shake your head no. Does that make sense? Yes. Yeah. And it's all individuals. Let's just nail that one right now. This is the Journal of the American Medical Association that is saying this. Everyone gets this every time they eat wheat. The world needs to know this. And no more are we going to say, well, for some people, sometime. No, it's everyone, every time. But it heals until you don't heal anymore. And that this weekend is about learning how do you prevent that point where you don't heal anymore. It's called loss of oral tolerance. The results of this study indicate that gliadin activates zonulin, remember that's with intestinal permeability, in normal intestinal epithelial cells, that's the lining, in the normal cells of the intestines. This response occurs only a few minutes after you eat it. As soon as it gets into the small intestine, not in the stomach, but after it gets out of the stomach into the small intestine, within 5 minutes, you've got intestinal permeability every time. And there are many studies on this. We just don't have the time to go through many studies on it. But it happens every time you eat wheat. So what part of wheat is toxic? This gets to the testing now. We're not going to go into a lot of testing now. We'll do it later. But what part of wheat is toxic? Is it gluten? Wheat's composed of 4 classes of proteins. There's 4 different types of proteins: globulins, gliadins, glutenins, and albumins, which together, that family is called gluten. And we've all, some of us have seen, these wheat kernels, that there's wheat bran, the inside's called the endosperm, and then there's wheat germ. And the proteins in wheat, 80 to 85% of the proteins in wheat are gluten proteins. But we also have proteins in the endosperm that are not gluten proteins, in the aileron layer that are not gluten proteins, in the fruit and seed layer that are not gluten proteins, and in the wheat germ layer that are not gluten proteins. So if you're only testing gluten, if that's the only test you're looking at, you'll find most of them, but you're going to miss some of them because a person may not be reacting to gluten. They're reacting to other components of wheat. So our testing needs to be comprehensive enough to cover all of the components of wheat that your immune system may be reacting to. How might a wheat-related disorder manifest? What does it look like? And this is really important, and our doctors just haven't had the chance to read the studies that talk about all of this. So when you look at the mechanisms of how a wheat-related disorder might demonstrate itself, first one, most obvious one, is a wheat allergy. We all know about allergists, and they do the skin prick test, and allergies can be really dangerous. There are 4 different types of manifestations of allergies, 4 main types: respiratory, food allergies, wheat-dependent, exercise-induced asthma, and hives. So there are 4 different types of an allergy, basically. Then we know about celiac disease. There's over 20,000 articles in the medical literature on celiac disease. Then we have non-immune deficiency complications like osteoporosis. That may be the manifestation of a wheat-related disorder. Then we have non-celiac gluten sensitivity, and that's not an allergy reaction. That's a non-IgE response, so it's not an allergy. It's an IgM, IgG, IgA response. So the testing needs to be comprehensive to look at all this stuff. It's not right now. Then we have wheat amylase trypsin inhibitors, and just the tiniest little bit of response to that may cause a miscarriage. There are a number of studies where wheat amylase trypsin inhibitors may be the trigger that initiates a blood clot that can cause miscarriages or strokes. You see how important it is to know this stuff? And most of the world doesn't know this. Then we've got lectins, wheat germ agglutinins. A book came out within the last year or 2 called The Plant Paradox, all about the danger of lectins. It's a good book. Now that author says no one should eat lectins. I disagree with that. No one should eat lectins that has an immune system that's fighting lectins, obviously, but lectins have been around for a long time. Then we have FODMAPs, which is low fermentable, poorly absorbed carbohydrates. And this is the one that's caused so much problem where people say, oh, gluten sensitivity is a fad. No, it's not. It's the FODMAPs. And this is why people in America say, I can go to Europe and eat the wheat and I don't have a problem. But I go back home and I have a problem because it's the FODMAPs that cause the GI complaints, the bloating and the gas. The majority of those symptoms may come from the FODMAPs in wheat. And when people from America come to Europe, your wheat has lower FODMAPs, so they don't get the gut complaints. So they eat the pasta in Europe and they think they're okay. But what they don't know is that the immune system keeps reacting. You just don't have the gut complaints. So you have all the inflammation. When they come home and we retest them, their inflammatory markers are sky high when they ate the wheat in Europe. But they didn't have any gut complaints, so they thought there's no problem. Now, for every person that has gut complaints from a problem with wheat, there are 8 people that don't. The ratio is 8 to 1. It might be your brain. It might be your menstrual cycle, where the symptoms are there. It might be your joints. It might be brain fog. It might be your kidneys. It might be your bladder. It might be male sexual function. The studies are there on all this stuff. For some people, the symptoms just depend on where the weak link is in your chain. You pull at a chain, it breaks at the weakest link, right? It's at one end, the middle, the other end, your heart, your brain, your liver, your kidneys. It just depends on where the weak link is as to where that chain's going to break. So when you get the inflammation from wheat, when you cross that line of oral tolerance and you get the inflammation from wheat, it's going to manifest wherever your genetic weak link is. Remember I said the genes don't mean you're going to get the disease? The genes mean you're vulnerable to the disease. So you pull at the chain, and that's the link that's going to break. So don't pull on the chain is the goal here. So that's the takeaway for the weekend. Don't pull on the chain, right? So, well, how am I pulling on the chain? Well, that's what you have to find out. And what many people will find out is that wheat is a component, the primary component pulling on their chain. And they just don't know it because they may not have gut complaints. So they don't associate what they're eating with the thyroid problems they have or the kidney problems they have. Then we have gluteomorphins. They're called morphins because they bind to the opiate receptors in the body like morphine does. And that affects your brain function substantially. So these are all of the different components of wheat. So our laboratory testing has to become much more sensitive to identify the different components of wheat that your immune system may be reacting to. Right now, most of the laboratories are checking for gluten. It's actually alpha-gliadin, one of the glutens. And they're just checking for that. And that's important. It's very important to check, but we need more comprehensive testing. And it's the demand of the doctors and the general public that will encourage the government to encourage the laboratories and support the laboratories in doing more comprehensive testing. And here's what I recommend to all of our doctors: anytime that you are not getting the results that you want from the protocols that you're delivering, if they're not working the way they should, just think about wheat and explore the diet, explore what your patient is eating. Because of all such manifestations can occur in the absence of GI symptoms, physicians require a high degree of suspicion to diagnose celiac. This is from the Journal of the American Medical Association, Pediatrics. Because it may not manifest in your gut, you have to suspect this anytime your protocols aren't working, anytime. This is especially crucial in light of the fact that almost all these ailments can be effectively reversed by a strict gluten-free diet. Could they say it any clearer? I don't know how these researchers could say it any clearer. Doesn't matter if it's thyroid, liver, kidney, gallbladder, bones, muscles, joints, skin, doesn't matter. If you have this problem with wheat, you get the wheat out of there, you stop pulling on the chain, or you reduce the pulling on the chain. When you reduce the pulling on the chain, you get better.
Hi, my name is Dr. Priya Kamani. I am founder and CEO of Living Matrix. I'm here at the International Symposium of Wheat-Related Disorders. And it's been a great experience. Just to give you a quick snapshot of my talk, I presented data from Living Matrix. We have about 20% of the patients in Living Matrix have wheat-related disorders. And I spoke about the patient's history and how patients usually present. And just a few tips: you have to have a high index of suspicion. A lot of these patients present with a very, very complex history, often have a lot of things going on that may not fit very well together. A lot of times you see problems. Classically, you hear people reporting GI issues, but in addition to the GI issues, you also often see people with energy, fatigue problems, immune problems, hormonal problems, specifically a lot of thyroid issues. So when you see somebody that comes in with this whole spectrum of problems and issues, you have to consider a wheat-related disorder. And if you have that, keep that index of suspicion high, the more complex the patient is, the more likely you're going to find something.
Next up is the man who back in the 1990s was the pioneer saying there is a problem with wheat for some children outside of celiac disease. Professor Rodney Ford is a pediatric gastroenterologist and a board-certified allergist from New Zealand, Christchurch, New Zealand. Let's listen to what he has to say.
It's an honor to introduce Dr. Rodney Ford, who is a pediatric gastroenterologist, an allergist, and a nutrition consultant. He's a former associate professor of pediatrics at Christchurch School of Medicine, New Zealand, and he's a recognized person and an expert on adverse food reactions. His thesis, which was way back in 1982, was titled Food Hypersensitivity in Children, Diagnostic Approach to Milk and Egg Hypersensitivity. And this was regarded as his major work regarding diagnosis of food allergies in children. Currently, more recently, he has discovered that gluten plays a large part in pathophysiology of eczema. So we have Dr. Rodney Ford, who will be talking about pediatric manifestations of wheat-related disorders.
I have an invitation to you and everyone here. I'm going to introduce you to my clinic and some of my patients. And this is the question that I have to answer for every patient I see. Which child warrants a gluten-free diet? That's a difficult question to answer. In my clinic, I'm an allergist. I do skin prick testing looking for IgE immediate allergy, but we know that gluten sensitivity is not one of those types of illness. I did a PhD in food allergy and my gastroenterology in pediatrics. And 40 years ago, I wrote my first paper about allergy, and this was in 1980. And in 1980, when I was seeing children with food allergy, many of the mothers were telling me that their children were a lot better off wheat. I listened to them, but I had no test. They were negative on their skin test. They didn't have celiac disease, and I was interested, but a little bit dismissive, I think. And some of you are going on this journey yourself, and I'd like to take you on my journey with this beautiful girl, and this bath picture was taken by her mother, and when mother took this photo, she had no idea that her beautiful daughter would be displayed in Delhi. So here she is. I didn't see her then, she's just 1 year old. I saw her when she was 6. And there's Elizabeth, and she's the most cranky child in my clinic. Reflux, she was treated with ranitidine and cimetidine. There was no PPI in those days. Poor growth, stunted, tummy pain, miserable. And of course, I thought, Elizabeth has celiac disease. But she'd been seen by 2 professors previous to that, Professor Shannon and Professor Mortimer. They had both seen her in different hospitals. They had both thought she had celiac disease. They had both organized a small bowel biopsy, and the small bowel biopsy was normal, nothing found. Therefore, she didn't have celiac disease, she didn't have a gluten-related problem, and they kept on treating her with ranitidine with no effect. This is her growth. You can see when she's 6 years old there, she's not growing well at all. She's miserable. She's burping 40 or 50 times an hour. She doesn't have any friends. She reeks of acid. She's miserable. She cries all the time. She's not eating well. She's a very nasty child. We did some blood tests, and she happened to come in 1989 when our laboratory first was able to measure the anti-gliadin antibody. Remember, TTG, EMA wasn't available at this stage. It was a very high level. There it is. In their units, 220, and they say it should be less than 80. This is a clinic letter from my clinic, and it says, I'm still struggling with Elizabeth's problem of regurgitation. And it goes on, I have suggested a gluten-free diet for the next month to see whether this will improve her situation. This is 9 months after I read the result of her high gliadin antibody, because I talked to my colleagues and they said, if she doesn't have villus damage, she can't have celiac disease, and therefore she doesn't warrant a gluten-free diet. I took a leap of faith and I said, well, why not? I've been doing food allergy. My other clinic, I'd take people off egg, milk, soy, fish, crustaceans, nuts. All these things are causing problems in my other clinic. And in my gastroenterology clinic, why can't I try off gluten as well? So I did. And 4 weeks later, she came back with her mother, and I say in my clinic, at last we seem to be getting somewhere, because she's a whole heap better, and she is smiling for the first time. She is burping less. And there she is 2 years later, and she came to my clinic that day and said it was a miracle. And I think it is a miracle. You have to decide whether she's got celiac disease or not, because I thought she had a gluten illness, but it hadn't been described. And the medical colleagues around me said that you could only have celiac disease, and that was the only thing that gluten caused. There she is at 10. She went to another city, to another hospital, to another pediatrician who didn't believe my notes and said, you need to go back on gluten. Mother was compliant, put Elizabeth back on gluten, and she got sick. You might feel like that some days. When she was 24, I contacted her, and she was still gluten-free. She still got tummy pain when she did eat gluten by mistake. And last year, just a few months ago, she contacted me. She's now 34. I said, could you send a photo? And she said, she contacted me not to send the photo, but headaches, sore tummy, and eating gluten. And she wanted to know what her diagnosis was, because we never really gave her a diagnosis. I told her that she should assume that she does have celiac disease, but I couldn't prove it. And so she went off gluten, and for the first time I did her HLA, and she's DQ8. At the same time, her TTG is normal. I don't know. I know she's better off gluten. I can't call her celiac, and I would call her the first non-celiac gluten sensitivity patient I've seen. And people are asking, how long does this condition go on for? We don't know, but 34 years in this one, and counting probably. So I think she warrants a gluten-free diet, and I think her symptoms are real from gluten, and I think that probably she will be gluten intolerant her life long. I thought it might help you if I listed my symptoms. Lots of symptoms. There are so many symptoms of celiac disease and gluten-related disorders that it's very hard to make a diagnosis.
If you're enjoying the excerpts from the International Symposium on Wheat-Related Disorders, Beyond Celiac, Beyond the Gut, you have the opportunity to view all of the presentations in their entirety, all of them. Plus, because I was the chairman, you also will get links to all of the references that these presenters were talking about. All of them. They're all here for you. Click the link below to learn more.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rodney Ford. I've been asked to give a 1-minute tip about what I do in my clinic. Well, my 1-minute tip is when you see someone with eczema, dermatitis, itchy and uncomfortable, that don't just put creams and lotions and potions on it, look to see if there is a food provoking this, and my experience is that 8 out of 10 people with severe eczema get very, very much better on a gluten-free diet.
Next up is Dr. Deanna Minich, and Dr. Minich is going to talk about how do you put together, how do you compose a balanced, healthy, gluten-free diet.
Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Deanna Minich, and today I'm going to be talking with you about how to make gluten-free eating healthy. Let's talk about 5 easy steps to healthy gluten-free eating. And as I always say, follow the rainbow, and I'll show you why. First and foremost, you've already heard me say that it's very important to veer away from processed foods and to eat more whole foods. The reason why is because you'll get more fiber. Fiber is more filling, satiating. It also helps to bind toxic contaminants that may be in your food. You'll also have more phytonutrients. Phytonutrients are important for a variety of different mechanisms in the body, reducing inflammation, helping with insulin sensitivity, and even helping with stress response. And if you're eating whole foods rather than processed foods, then you're not going to have processed foods ingredients. So you're not going to have a lot of the toxic synthetic ingredients. So what I want you to do is focus on quality macronutrients. When we think of protein, carbohydrate, and fat, I want you to be thinking about quality protein, bringing in protein with every meal in order to blunt the glycemic impact of that meal. I want you to bring in quality fat sources, so not to reuse fats when it comes to frying or cooking. Also making sure that you use non-vegetable based oils, and if you can, move towards, or if you do use vegetable based oils, use the ones with higher smoke points, like grapeseed oil, avocado oil. Otherwise, coconut oil can also be, I know it's widely used in India, and that can be a better cooking fat. You know, my premise is to always get variety in whatever aspect of nutrition. Always shake it up, as I like to say. Now, when I say follow the rainbow, part of the reason I say that is because I want you to get the colors. And the colors, each of the colors of the rainbow are giving you different pigments that are protective. So if you only ate red colored foods, that might be helpful for something, but you're actually not getting the full array of what nature can offer in order to reduce inflammation, which is so important for many of you who are going gluten-free, who have chronic conditions related to gut health as a result of having gluten in your diet. So get the rainbow, make a checklist in which you're checking off day by day red foods, orange foods, yellow foods, green foods, blue, purple foods, tan foods, white foods, all plant-based in origin. And as you can see here, This is a snapshot of sausage, some French fries. Technically, this could be considered gluten-free, but is it healthy? And I think you know the answer to that. It's not healthy. Here would be a better alternative, having something like quinoa with vegetables. And I know that some of you are vegan, vegetarian. You can follow a healthy regimen as a vegan, vegetarian, or an omnivore. So here's an instance where you could make this vegan or omnivore, where you could have vegetables, nuts, seeds together with quinoa so that you have complete protein. And maybe you're adding in some flaxseed oil or some type of oil, maybe ghee, in order to pull the flavor. And don't forget, I'm going to talk about spices, adding spices to something like this meal. Alternate grains also need to be rotated. In fact, whatever you eat, even if it's vegetables, rotation. Make sure that you're getting lots of variety. Alternate those alternate grains. If you have corn one day, make sure that you have, after 1 to 2 days, if you do have that corn, now go over on days 3 to 4, maybe do rice, then maybe move to quinoa, maybe move to millet, maybe move to amaranth. Try to alternate as much as you can, because I think that adds to more diversity and resilience within the gut microbiome. The gut microbiome is strengthened when you offer a variety of complex compounds from plant-based foods. Now, breakfast can be one. I know for sure in the United States it can be challenging. At breakfast, there's usually a lot of brown, yellow, and white foods. However, you can make it colorful. I think that breakfast is one of the most important meals of the day. You start off having that moderate breakfast, burn that metabolic fire with lunch, and then have an early, less robust dinner, something that's cooked. So with breakfast, there can be a number of different options, like bringing in fruit. If you do dairy and yogurt, that might be an option. A warm cereal could be an option. There can be so many different things. In fact, I think that for many people, they've gotten into a rut when it comes to eating specific foods for breakfast. And I do think that there can be a number of things to eat for breakfast that we might be used to eating for dinner. And it's just because in our mind, we've become acclimated to certain foods at certain times. But we can switch it up. And as you know, in India, and I respect the ancient traditions of India, Ayurvedic medicine, and if you look at ancient eating patterns, there is this idea of bringing in fermented foods, eating a cooler meal midday when our metabolic fire is burning. So bringing in something like a salad with protein can be a wonderful gluten-free addition. And maybe for a lunch or a dinner too, to bring in things like dal. Dal, lentils give you quality protein and fiber and phytonutrients all in one. I think that it's really a wonderful food. It's something that India can tout as one of its healing foods, I would say. And most of all, what I think about when I think of India is including spices. You have a pharmacy in your kitchen. It's your spice rack. There are so many different spices that you can add to these meals to make them flavorful, to make them engaging, fun, colorful. Now, the only thing I'll mention with spices is to be conscientious of the contents of the spices. So in some of the spices, what some manufacturers will do is they'll add things like maltodextrin, and maltodextrin is a starch. It can be derived from many different grains, and oftentimes it's wheat. So make sure that your spices are pure. Clean out your kitchen of old spices, anything that's crusty or caked or no longer good. You know, spices have a shelf life of about a year. So let me summarize for you. First and foremost, going gluten-free requires preparation. your initiative of going gluten-free is only going to be as good as you've prepared to go gluten-free. And I feel like if you can take away some things from this presentation, there's a spectrum of how you can do gluten-free. Pick out some things that I've talked about. So if you just follow along with a processed food diet mentality, what can happen is you can end up with nutrient imbalances and maybe even subsequent chronic health issues, depending on how you're doing gluten-free. So the 5 steps I would say to having more color and going healthy with a gluten-free diet would be to choose whole foods whenever you can, whole plant-based foods. Have those quality macronutrients and make sure that you have them at every meal. Because if you just have a lot of carbohydrate with a processed gluten-free product, you're not balancing that glycemic response. So you need quality protein, you need quality oil. Plant foods, bring in those plants, bring in the color. Each of the colors of the rainbow will give you different nutrients. Most people don't realize that blue-purple compounds in things like berries can help with cognition and memory. The orange colorful compounds like beta-carotene can help with things like ovulation and reproductive health. So keep in mind that it's so important to get the rainbow variety of plant foods. Variety. I hope that if there's just one thing you take away from this presentation, it will be that of the importance of variety for your gut microbiome, variety in choices of plant foods. And if there are specific indications where you might need a little bit more in the way of certain nutrients, I think it's important to either look at symptoms, have a health professional look at those symptoms, see what you're experiencing, and then see whether or not you may require additional dietary supplementation. Because oftentimes in individuals with celiac disease or with non-celiac gluten sensitivity, what can happen is that we just have increased need because we might have more inflammation. We might have other chronic conditions that require an even higher amount of certain nutrients to help us along. So I'll stop there. I want to thank you for your attention. Hope you've enjoyed the conference so far and that you're able to put into motion one or more of the tips in this presentation to make gluten-free healthy. Thank you.
Well, it's been a pleasure being the guest host of a functional forum. Thank you, James, and thank you for all of you who have attended. Of course, we're here in New Delhi at the first International Symposium on Wheat-Related Disorders, Beyond Celiac, Beyond the Gut. Sellout crowd, great information, cutting-edge information, and we're very grateful to have pulled this off and very happy to share it with you. So from all of us here in India to you, thank you.